Tampa, Florida, 1942. MacDill Army Airfield. A group of young pilots stands on the flight line. They aren't looking at the sky with hope. They are looking at the thick, black column of smoke rising from Tampa Bay. Another one. Another crew gone. They whisper the slogan. It's a dark joke. A rhyme to keep the fear away. One a day in Tampa Bay. The killer was the Martin B-26 Marauder. In 1942, this wasn't just an airplane. It was a scandal. It was killing more American pilots in training than the Germans were shooting down in combat. The pilots, they hated it. They called it the Widowmaker. They called it the Martin Murderer. They called it the Flying Coffin. But the most famous nickname was the cruelest. They looked at its fuselage. It was round, sleek, like a cigar. And they looked at the wings. They were tiny, stubby, almost invisible from the side. So they called it the Baltimore Whore. Why? Because they said it has no visible means of support. By the summer of 1942, the B-26 was on trial. Harry Truman, the future president, was leading a committee. He was furious. He wanted to know why the Army was buying a plane that killed its own men. He was ready. He was ready to kill the program. He was ready to scrap every single B-26. But he didn't. And thank God he didn't. Because 3 years later, when the smoke cleared over Europe, the statisticians ran the numbers. They looked at the B-17, the B-24, the B-25, and they found something impossible. The Widowmaker, the plane that everyone wanted to destroy, had the lowest combat loss rate of any American bomber in the war. This is the story of how the most feared airplane in the world became the weapon that broke the back of the Third Reich. To understand the disaster, you have to understand the dream. In 1939, the U.S. Army Air Corps wanted a super bomber. They issued a requirement that sounded like science fiction. They wanted a medium bomber that was faster than most fighter planes. Top speed, 323 miles per hour. The challenge fell to the Glenn L. Martin Company, and specifically to a 28-year-old aeronautical genius named Peyton Magruder. Magruder knew physics. To go fast, you need two things: massive power, low drag. So he gave the B-26 two massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasps, 2,000 horsepower each, the most powerful engines in the world. And then he clipped the wings. He designed a perfectly round aerodynamic fuselage and attached short, stubby, low-drag wings. It was a hot rod. It was built for speed. But in aviation, there is always a trade-off. Small wings mean you have to fly fast to stay in the air. A normal bomber, like the B-17, could land gently at 90 miles per hour. It floated down. The B-26, if you slowed down to 90, you fell out of the sky like a brick. The B-26 had to approach the runway at 135 miles per hour. This was the problem. The Army wasn't putting test pilots in these planes. They were putting 20-year-old farm boys, kids who had learned to fly on slow, forgiving biplanes. Suddenly, they were strapped into a 17-ton rocket. They came in for a landing. They got scared. They instinctively pulled back on the throttle to slow down, and the wings just stopped flying. It wasn't a design flaw. The plane flew exactly as Magruder designed it. It was a training flaw. The Army was treating a race car like a tractor, and the price was paid in blood. By late 1942, the situation was critical. Panic spread through the training bases. Pilots were refusing to fly. They were requesting transfers to B-17s, B-24s, anything but the Marauder. Crews were writing their wills before their first solo flight. The problem was compounded by the engines. The early propellers were electric, and the batteries were weak. Sometimes, on takeoff, the propellers would run away. The plane would flip over and burn. In Washington, the Truman Committee descended on the Martin Company. They accused Glenn Martin of profiteering, of selling a defective product. Production was halted. The Army Air Force commander, General Hap Arnold, was under immense pressure to cancel the B-26 entirely. The Marauder was on death row. It needed a savior. It didn't need an engineer. It needed the greatest pilot in America. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, the hero of the Tokyo raid, a man with a Ph.D. in aeronautics and nerves of steel. General Arnold sent Doolittle to investigate. "Is the plane safe?" he asked. Doolittle didn't read the reports. He went to the flight line. He gathered the terrified student pilots. "Watch this," he said. Doolittle fired up the engines. He taxied out. The pilots watched, expecting a normal takeoff. Instead, Doolittle roared down the runway, and just as the wheels left the ground, he killed the left engine. The crowd gasped. An engine failure on takeoff in a B-26 was a death sentence. But Doolittle didn't crash. He countered the yaw with his rudder. He kept the nose down to build speed. And then he did the impossible. With one engine dead and the other screaming, Jimmy Doolittle pulled the nose up and performed a barrel roll. He landed the plane. He taxied back to the stunned students. He climbed out, lit a cigarette, and said, "The airplane is fine. It's just unforgiving. You have to fly it. Don't let it fly you." Doolittle changed the training. He taught them speed is life. Don't glide. Drive it onto the runway. Keep the power on until the wheels touch. He removed the extended wings that Martin had added to try and fix the problem. "Clip them back," he said. "Let it go fast." The crashes stopped. The confidence returned. The Widowmaker had been tamed. Now it was time to go to war. The B-26's combat debut was a disaster, but not because of the plane, because of the tactic. At the Battle of Midway, the Army tried to use the B-26 as a torpedo bomber. They sent 4 of them, low and slow, against the entire Japanese fleet. It was a slaughter. The B-26 was fast, but it wasn't a dancer. Low on the water, it was a sitting duck. 2 were shot down, 2 came back so full of holes they were scrapped. The pilots said, never again. But in North Africa, they found the answer. They moved the B-26 up to medium altitude, 10,000 to 15,000 feet, too high for small arms fire,
too low for heavy flak to be accurate, and fast enough to outrun the German fighters. The Germans were shocked. The B-26 was a tank. It had armor plate, it had self-sealing fuel tanks, and it was fast. German fighters would dive on them, but the B-26s would just open the throttles and leave them in the dust. And if they got close, the B-26 had 12 .5 caliber machine guns. The Widowmaker was gone. The crews started calling it something else. The B-26 will get you home.
But the true legend of the Marauder was written in the skies over France, the 9th Air Force. Their mission was different from the big B-17s. The B-17s bombed factories in Berlin. The B-26s were the bridge busters. Their job was to pave the way for D-Day, to destroy bridges, rail yards, ammo dumps, and airfields. Precision bombing. The B-26 was incredibly accurate. Because it flew lower and faster, it could drop its bombs right down the chimney. But flying lower meant flying into the teeth of the German flak. The flak over France was intense, and this is where the B-26 proved its worth. It was tough, unbelievably tough. There is one plane that proves this better than any other. A B-26 named Flak-Bait. Flak-Bait lived up to her name. She was a magnet for German metal. Over the course of the war, Flak-Bait flew 207 combat missions. That is the record. More than the Memphis Belle, more than any American bomber in the European theater. She was hit by flak on almost every single mission. She came back with one engine. She came back with no electrical power. She came back with a shell hole through the pilot's instrument panel. At one point, she had over 1,000 patched holes in her skin. But she never went down. She always brought her crew home. This was the story across the entire fleet. The B-26 could lose an engine, lose half a tail, have its wings shredded, and it would just keep flying. The heavy wing loading, the thing that made it dangerous to land, also made it steady. It was a steady gun platform. It plowed through turbulence. The Widowmaker moniker was forgotten. Now the crews fought to get into a B-26 unit.
When the war ended in 1945, the U.S. Army Air Force tallied the score. The B-17 Flying Fortress, the safe plane, had a loss rate of roughly 1.5%. The B-24 Liberator had a similar rate. And the B-26 Marauder, the Flying Coffin, the Murderer, the B-26 Marauder had a combat loss rate of less than 0.5%, 0.5%. It was the safest place to be in the sky. The pilots who flew it never forgot it. They were a special breed. They were the ones who mastered the beast. They realized that the B-26 wasn't a Widowmaker. It was just a professional's weapon. It demanded skill. It demanded respect. It demanded speed. And in return, it gave them victory. And more importantly, it gave them their lives. From the swamps of Tampa Bay to the bridges of the Rhine, the B-26 Marauder remains the greatest comeback story in aviation history.